Here is our lecture on active reading. So hopefully you saw the review of pre-reading and you feel pretty good about that. Again, that is going to cover what you're going to write about in section 1 of essay 2. This video is all about active reading though. Once you have completed your pre-reading, it's time to get started with your active reading, which means actively and actually reading the article you chose. I love this quote. The key to pursuing excellence is to embrace an organic, long-term learning process and not to live in a shell of static, safe mediocrity. Usually, growth comes at the expense of previous comfort or safety. What I'm going to ask you to do in this video is to explore some different ways of reading actively, to really think carefully about the way that you read. So many students complain about hating reading and how much time it takes, how much they dislike it. Reading's hard, just like writing is hard. However, both reading and writing are kind of essential elements of your college experience and will end up being important elements of living your life as a professional. There are going to be very few high-paying jobs that allow you to get away without having to read or write or communicate. You'll find in a lot of job descriptions, whether you're a neuroscientist or an engineer or a nurse or anything, you're going to need good communication skills, and reading and writing are both a really important part of that. Now, when I say growth, I'm anticipating that so many people read like this. Passive reading feels like dead weight. I mean, it's boring. You don't get much out of it. You read and then you probably fall asleep in the middle of a paragraph. You end up rereading the same paragraph over and over. You just get more and more bored and you don't feel like you are getting through the reading at all. These are the things we want to avoid. Passive reading, and hopefully you can tell by the tone here, is not good. If this is how you read, so be it, but you are basically wasting your time. If you read every single article the exact same way, it's not very efficient. If you start reading without ever thinking about the purpose of why you're doing that, you're wasting your time. If you speed through everything really quickly and don't slow down when things start to get tough, you are wasting your time. If you fail to do all of the pre-reading things that we've been talking about and just jump right into the reading, okay, you're probably going to miss a lot of things. And if the goal is to understand, you're not setting yourself up for success. And there are all these other things that passive readers do that we don't want to do, right? We want to be good, strong, active readers. And that includes things like pre-reading, examine the purpose of the assignment before reading, know why you're reading. But then also preview the text itself, the article itself, by skimming headings, topic sentences, and keywords. And I would even dial that back more and say by skimming the title, the conclusion, the introduction, and the section headings. Give yourself a framework and a foundation that will help you to understand the reading. As you read, make sure that there are times when you read quickly, when things are really clear, and also more slowly when things get really tough. If something is hard to read, you want to make sure that you stop, you pause, you think carefully about that passage. You want to stop and make sure that you're understanding. It's okay if you don't understand something and have to reread it. That actually means that you care and you're trying to understand it. And one of the things we're going to talk about in this video is also annotate while you read, write as you read, produce as you read. Don't just passively sit there sort of underlining vaguely. And then the last thing you want to do with active reading is you want to reflect. And that's why we have section 3 of our essay, which is I want your response. After you have described your pre-reading and after you write a summary of the article that you chose, I do want you to spend at least a couple of paragraphs reflecting and evaluating what you read. All of these things are great guidelines for being an active and effective reader. What I think is interesting about Essay 2's assignment is that when I'm asking you to start off by pre-reading, that's actually one of the hardest things to do. I'm asking you to make judgments. I'm asking you to assess what's going on in the article, make some estimations, make some predictions. You can kind of see all of these words up here. This is a higher order skill. Pre-reading requires you to think really hard without a whole lot of evidence. And I definitely want to see that in section 1 of your essay. When you're actively reading the article, you are involved in something that's kind of a medium level challenging task. This is an intellectually challenging task. To read well, you have to analyze. You have to be able to break the article down into simpler pieces of knowledge. That's a really important part of active reading. And then when we finally get to writing our summary, we're kind of down here at the level of comprehension, but we can't get there. We can't comprehend, strangely enough, unless we do these higher level things to try and get us just down here to the summary. So that's why I think this assignment seems maybe easy, but it's quite challenging if you're really engaged. Here are some strategies for active reading. Before you start, do your pre-reading. That's how this assignment is designed, because that's how every reader should approach every article they read. Pre-read first, so that you can get yourself started well. Make sure that you know that reading once is not necessarily the only thing you're going to need to do. And make sure also that you put down your highlighter and instead write as you read. Strategy number 1 is certainly make sure you know why you're reading. Don't just read to get it done. Make sure that you have a clear agenda, you have a clear goal in your mind. Do you need to just know some information for a quiz, or do you need to read an article so that you can find evidence to support a thesis? Are you writing to analyze, or are you writing to summarize? When you don't know, when your instructor doesn't make it clear, just try to summarize. Make sure that you are reading so that you understand the basics of whatever you are reading. And in order to summarize, we need to do several things. We need to be able to identify the author's purpose. Now, in your pre-reading, you made guesses at this, but when it comes time to actively read, you need to actually find out what the purpose is. You need to read carefully enough that you can accurately indicate what the author's purpose was. You need to accurately indicate the author's thesis. This may not be a sentence within the article, but it should be your expression, your understanding of what the author's main point is. What does the author want the reader to do or understand? And then finally, in a summarized reading, you would need to express all of the main ideas, not some of them, but all of them. You'd need to paraphrase them in your own words. And you need to convey the order of those ideas. First, second, third, fourth. Reading to summarize really is not, there are not too many things here. Purpose, thesis, main ideas. But these are not necessarily easy things to identify. Reading strategy number 1, and I cannot stress this enough, is you want to print out articles that you need to know well. If you just need to skim an article for class and understand some of the basics, go ahead and read it online. But for an assignment like ours, for an assignment like Essay 2, you must understand the article that you are summarizing. You've got to understand it all. And when you have to do that, you probably want to print it out so that you can engage with it more closely. Research shows that we get more out of reading when we read things that are printed out. This is not the same if you're reading a fiction book. So if you like to read fiction on your Kindle, you get almost as much out of fiction reading as nonfiction reading. But when you're reading for school, if you need to read it closely, research studies show that printing it out is definitely a better bet. The next thing you want to do with your active reading is you want to annotate. And when we say annotate, here's an example of me, and this is my homework for this semester. I have annotated this chapter so that I'm making notes for myself about the important points that I want to discuss in my essay that I'm writing. And I want to call your attention to a few things. At the very top of my annotation, I've written out the assignment question, just to remind me as I'm reading, okay, what is it that I need to get out of this? So I've just made a note for myself. Hey, as you're reading, remember why you're reading. You can see here in these little notes that I circle words that I think are important, and then I'm summarizing. I'm interpreting and summarizing what I think I see in each of these little lines. I'm marking this thing up all over, which is why I love having it printed out. There are certain elements of my reading where I have just kind of circled the whole thing and then I put a little note next to it. I'm summarizing what is here, and then I'm actually asking a question of myself. Does this mean that it's a valid contract? Is it a contract? Yes or no? And then the last thing that I'm doing on my reading is at the very bottom of the page, I'm just kind of summarizing what I've read. So as I'm reading, I am writing, I am producing. I'm not just like taking it in and letting it sit in my brain. I'm actually trying to produce content. And studies have shown that this allows students to get more out of what they're reading. If you are one of the highlighters, I love this meme because it shows how a lot of students highlight. It's a trick. It makes you feel like you're not being passive if you're going through and you're just like highlighting things, but I think it's not actually very active. And research has shown for quite some time that there are cases where writing or highlighting actually is not helpful. It's not helpful at all. Sometimes it makes you do worse on a test because it makes you think that you're studying. It makes you think that you're getting the information you need, but you're not. And it can hurt your ability to get what you need to get out of a text. So annotating, by far a better bet than just highlighting. We lucked out with our articles for this unit. You don't need to do any chunking because the authors have given you section headings. But as you read, for each section heading, and within each section heading, create a 2 to 3 word margin comment for each paragraph. Not a sentence, but just a little comment for yourself about what the author is saying and doing in that paragraph. Eventually, you can come back to these notes and it can help you to form the sentences that you will need to form in order to summarize a particular set of paragraphs. We've talked a lot about what the author is saying versus what the author is doing, and I just want to remind you that these are some of the things that authors do. As you read, it might be helpful to say, well, what is my author doing in this paragraph? Sometimes they're doing a few of these things. But describing what an author is saying and doing will lead you to a more robust and complete and accurate summary. It's important to remember that as you are reading, you need to pause and paraphrase, and that's not a bad thing. When you pause and you paraphrase and you really try to think about what an author is saying and express it in your own words, you may need to reread several times. You may need to use the dictionary to understand a few words. You may need to write out the paraphrase, realize that it's really, really bad, and redo it. All of that is learning. All of that is a lot of work, but it's going to get you to a place where you do actually understand the article. And then finally, when you are engaged in active reading, and this is the last part of essay 2, is your response. This is an important thing that I want to hear about from you. Once you have finished reading the article, and also perhaps as you are reading, make note of where you're getting confused. Make note of where you see connections between this article and other readings that we've done in our class, or other readings that you've done in other classes. And maybe most importantly, make note of what you like or dislike about the article. Really try to focus on where you are connecting with it, because when you connect with something that you're reading, it becomes more alive for you. It gets situated in your brain more deeply if you can relate it to your own life. So again, to summarize, strategies for active reading include: first, doing your pre-reading. Second, knowing that you probably are going to have to read more than once. And third, go through all of the things that we've talked about here. Make sure that you are printing out the article. Allow yourself to mark it up. Allow yourself to make notes in the margin. Allow yourself to express not just what the author's saying, but what the author's doing. And paraphrase, paraphrase, paraphrase. Good luck reading your articles this weekend. Remember that on Monday, we will be starting to write your summaries. You can't do that unless you have read your article. Remember also that accuracy and completeness of these summaries is really important. So take your time reading, read slowly, read actively, and this essay will hopefully not be too challenging for you.